Welcome. So topic is Android Jetpack Room. The Room Persistent Library. So Android provides us as part of reactive programming. So the one of the architecture components that is Room. The Room Persistence Library is built on ORM, that is Object Relation Model. So this object relation model layer is built on top of the escalate. So we define a DDL or DML statements in form of Java classes, and the object relation model layer it maps to the actual SQL language and do the actual operations. So when the query is executed, the result set will be mapped to the Java object. So that is the way it's a room works, and room is built on object relation model and it deals with Java objects. Let's see the simple example. See that I did a simple example. So when I click on add employee, that employee record and updates to the database, and database it updates the observable data, that is live data, and the live data notifies the observer and refresh the UI. So this example, see that when I click on add employee, it adds the record with the employee number. It's internally incrementing this employee number, and then I'm for simplicity I'm making this image and name is the same. So it adds the row to the table, and when there is an update on the table, it updates the live data, and live data notifies the observer, and observer refresh the UI. So this simple example we're going to see it now. So in the room we need to DDL statements or DML statements we define through Java classes. So the room library provides us the annotations, set of annotations to define that statement SQL statements through Java classes. So first I want to create a table name with employee table. So that we call annotation. The class which is annotated with the entity, and that means that tells that we create a table with the name class name. Otherwise we can provide a name to override the class name, that is table name. So TL I given that employee as a table name, and the instance variables will be the column names of the table. If we want to override that, give the specific name, and then we can give with the annotation column info. So the name is amp number, and second name is second column name is amp name. And for the simplicity, I'm not defining the variable for storing the path of that employee image. So this class is annotated with entity, and table name is employee, and the columns are this employee number and employee name and getters and setters. So next we need to define that data access object. So DAO. So to this is the architecture of this room, and there is a layer on top of escalate, and this layer we call this as a DAO, and this need to be annotated with at DAO. So in this DAO we provide the queries and DML statements, and that statements we provide through for selecting all employees from the employee, and we we use the annotation at query, and then so that query is bind to the method get employee, and it returns that result set and maps to the collection. See that? So we executes the query and it bind to this method. So when you call this method, it executes the query and the result set is mapped to that collection. So here it is be given as a live data, and it wraps that collection. Live data, it wraps that collection with the live data so that it notifies the observer, and the observer refresh the UI. So that is the room is automatically updates that when there is an update, when there is an update on the table, and it requeries and it executes this method get employee and updates the live data, and live data updates the observer, the observers refresh the UI. So insert a record into the table, and we need to use annotation at insert. So we need to provide that tuple and that class, and which should have the which has the column names that is defined in the employee table. So here is that the select query, and we can pass the where clause arguments through the arguments of that method, and that arguments are bind to the where clause selection args. So this is the way we need to define. We have defined the table and we define the DOS, and the next we define the database. See this, the database we define that this provides us the annotation at database, and we need to provide the all the tables in that database, that is through entities property, and then here is one table employee class and version, and export schema is false. So if it is export schema is false, and we can export this data schema into the as a JSON. If it is true, we can export it into the as a JSON schema too, and we can save it in our disk. So this is we define as a singleton, and then so in entire application we use only one instance of that database, so that always it returns the single instance of the database, and we need to provide that DAOs as abstract methods. See, this is abstract class, and we need to provide the DO all DAOs as a abstract methods. So when I build database builder, it implements that create the classes and that implements these DAOs. And see here that so we are given that employee data class and then database name, so it creates the database. So it returns the single instance, and then wherever you would like to access, we want to access this database with this get instance, that it returns the instance of the database. So now we have created a table, we created a DAOs, and we created the AMP database, so that we can we can access the database and through calling the DML statements, that is through AMP database DAOs. So let's see that now our requirement is to display the list of employees on the screen. So I define the view model, and this so Android view model, so that it gives the context of application context, and so define the view model, and this view model, the instance of the view model is retains when the configuration changes, so that it it binds that instance to the activity or fragment. So now see that I define a observable live data, and that is amplest observable, and that live data amplest observable, and this is observable. See this get employees we discussed and returns the live data, and live data is returns the live data so that it assigned to the live data instance, that is this is observable and just naming convention is my list observable. So when you add observables, it emits the values that list employee list to that observer. See that main activity. See that a view model. Look at this. The view model providers and view model provides actually gets when configuration changes, then it gets the instance and of that bind to this activity, and then I'm getting the view model instance, and this is notify dataset change. So then that's it, and we call the get employees and return the observable and add the observer, and it emits the list of employees, and we set it on the recycler view. So we need to insert the employee. For that I define a class add employee, and then I'm passing the tuple of that employee class. Pass this in for when if I would like to want to add a record, and then I pass to this tuple object, so that I'm passing through that employee entity class, and then so by default it doesn't allow the SQL queries to run on main thread, so we need to code the async task for that, and I'm passing that employee object which with the values the new employee and the name, and then async task actually it calls the add new employee on the DO. So when it inserts the data in the database, so it requires that get employee, and then it returns the live data and it observable and emits the data to the observer, and then it refreshes that, so notify data has changed, and it refresh that UI. So that's it. See that uh, so when an add employee, and it is refreshing on the UI, so it calls add employee and inserts, and it refresh that, and it updates the live data, and live data it updates the live data, and live data notifies that observer, and its notified data has changed. So this is add employee. I'm just calling add employee method. So this is all about room to refresh the UI automatically when there is a change or update on the database.